We're just going to chat. Today is a very sort of pre-Christmas relaxed open day. It saves lives. Myself and Mark are going to have a chat about all the things we've done over the past 3 years. Can you believe it? Um, and we're not quite sure exactly how many people are going to join us as well, because it is a little bit busy before Christmas, and we didn't have any speakers. But the objective today is to uh, share with you a little bit about what our plans are for Open Innovations and Open Data Saves Lives 2.0. Mark's was just discussing how the is it this Chief Analytics Network? Is that the
Chief Analytical Officers Network. So we've done it slightly deliberately. So in the NHS specifically, and probably wider, there's a CIO network within the NHS, and there are wider, quite well established CIO networks that work out through eHealth Insider and Rewired magazine and things like that, and have done that really well. So that's a role that didn't exist 20 years ago, I don't think. There's been a lot of money fueled promotion around digital over the last 10, 20 years in a good way. Things like the global digital exemplars. And one of the things with those is that you needed to have someone at board level with a digital role to receive the quite large amounts of money that came down from NHS Digital and NHS England. I think for whatever reason, the kind of analytical community hasn't been quite as quick in that space, and I think that might be something that we might reflect on. I mean, with isolated examples like Alex and I doing bits and pieces of Dr. Foster, that kind of data analysis side of it probably hasn't had the limelight generally, apart from kind of spotlights occasionally through things like Dr. Foster, on itself as a profession. And I think that is definitely changing now. So
Right.
one of the things I would reflect over the last few years is, having had Ben Goldacre on here, the Goldacre review coming out and talking about the proactive sharing of data and everything good that's come out of that. I think that's been a kind of massive success. Through AFA, which is the Association of Professional Healthcare Analysts, we have launched, as Paul said, a Chief Analytical Officer Network. And that is basically, at the moment, just an informal gathering of kind of, I'll just say, senior analytical leaders, mostly working within providers and integrated care boards. But we've had a lot of interest from people working in NHS England, Health Foundation, and industry. And we're at a point where we kind of need to decide if we want to let all of those in, or whether we need to introduce some criteria like you have to work in a provider or something like that. I suspect we probably won't for now,
Yeah.
and it means that it might be a slightly ragbag group of people. But the aim of it, which again I think links back to this, part of the success of this is just kind of having a voice beyond one person about some quite big topics. So like, you will have seen in the news and you will have a view on it, that Palantir have been awarded a contract of about £500 million to build a thing called a federated data platform. We would have an interest in that, intellectually, technically, on a whole load of kind of levels. I think it's useful for people to get. One of the things I would reflect on as the success of this group is that it's sort of cliche, but you kind of have a louder voice if people get together. So I think this has been quite useful in that, and it will create new versions that kind of roll forward. And the CIO network is just one of those, for example. But yeah, federated data platform coming out is huge in the NHS, absolutely huge. And there's a risk in either direction. It can go really well or it could go really poorly. And the risk if it goes poorly is it also costs a lot of money. But if it goes well, it's kind of what you might, if all of us work to the centre, it's probably what you would design, because it sounds like conceptually the right sort of thing to do. So it has a very, very, in my personal opinion, a very well-meaning aspiration. If it succeeds or not will be, yeah, I agree, Graham. Yeah, and then hovering around that, you've got all of the work going on around secure data environments and what are now called subnational secure data environments, or SNSDEs, which is this kind of new acronym.
Oh yeah.
These are yeah, I think all of these, and just getting a small group together to just reflect on what we've done over the last few years. Um,
So Mark,
the analyst, yeah, go
I
on.
did a bit of I've got some slides.
It's not
But
unlike you.
basically, I know. But also we've got a website. And uh, what I thought, if I just do 2 minutes of sort of sharing what we've done, and then asking people's opinions. So if I, um, obviously, um, we have our website here. Um, I seem to have, Zoom has sort of cocked up a bit here. We've got a little bit of a. So can you see the Open Data Saves Lives website? If you play that video, it's Mark describing what we've done. Um, Now because Zoom has, I'm using two screens. Let's have a. Let's stop the share. Start again. Here we go. So can you see my? Yeah, you can see my slides here. Right. So, well, 3 years ago we set this up, and it was by Open Innovations and Beautiful Information. Drive innovation, do stuff, and it was a response to the pandemic, but it was instigated before the pandemic, if you like. So Mark came and saw us and persuaded us that we need to do stuff around health. The pandemic accelerated everything, and um, we would say for the first time a true network of collaborators and resources in the open in health. Usually it's either health on their own, or not really engaging with other people. Um, and we had one, two, three, four aims, which I think Mark would be really good to keep. To give the data back piece really important, where this one-way transaction of um, people giving data to the center but never getting it back and never seeing it or putting it in context. Save lives, not data. So um, I think if you gave the Palantir um, work that focus, which everything they did had to save lives, that would be a great metric that the your chief analyst roles were measuring them against would be amazing. Be radically open, which massively scares people working in health, but also enables things like this to exist. And share my data. So that's from a personal point of view. Um, we want data to be shared for the benefit of me, and also holding people in the health institutions to account that they are sharing that data. Which, when you look at all the data from the research of patients, they're very happy for their data to be shared as long as it's being used in the right way, or and they would call the right way, saving lives, making it easier to work, all of the things that people project onto the NHS, which is this beacon of hope um, that that gets projected onto. We got people to pay us to do this, which is great. TPP, SCW, the Health Foundation, and a little bits of funding around the place to make it work. We built a website, we've got branding, we've got an impact dashboard, we've done marketing. The thing exists, right? Um, a new sort of institution which is not owned by anyone but exists, we managed to create. We've done on conferences, we've done innovation projects. It's amazing what we've managed over the last 3 years. So these are the things that we summarized here. The website exists and functions and is able to be used as a whatever it needs to be, a place for the Chief Analyst Network to present their work would be a great start, or the prototype for whatever the thing needs in the future. 42 events, which is amazing. Contributed significantly to the Open Data Task and Finish group for NHS England. The helping, I guess, do a working out loud version of the reproducible analytical pipelines. We've done a number of innovation pathways and conferences. It's been great. And this is the summary, the summary. 135 speakers, sponsorship, loads of really important topics. And I'd add the GP data sharing session we did, which for me was one of the highlights, where a really important question was discussed by very knowledgeable participants. And by the end of it, I think I understood a load more, and we had a load of assets that could be. We shared them lots afterwards to help people understand what the context was, and also it allowed a conversation which wasn't people shouting at each other. Made confidential can come across as relatively negative. However, they were really positive in that session, which was just get it right and we'll join in. It was fascinating. Key topics covered, nearly 50 blogs. We're going to have to invite another one, Taz, to make that the big 50. And also supporting the test and finish groups within the NHS. That's the live dashboard. But what next? So we, as Open Innovations, are not of the health community. And it's quite interesting where we were, is that right in the pandemic, we were exactly the right organization to do something different, to join in. People wanted to do something different. And humans they naturally drop back into their own organizations, and we can't fight against that. So what we want to do is create a new, if you like, Open Data Saves Lives 2.0. So in 2024, we are looking for a place for Open Data Saves Lives, which necessarily isn't run by Open Innovations, but we would support it in terms of the network we have, the resources we're able to do to run events and maintain the website, so maintain the infrastructure. But also, how do we do this to make a difference? So we're using today to get some ideas about what we should do next. And also share with you that we're talking to the Health Foundation, who want to support the next phase. We're also speaking to Leeds City Council and their team, who run the Network Data Lab at the Health Foundation in Leeds, to see how they could use this asset to share their data from the Network Data Lab and their other work. And also Mark's team down there in Kent are looking at how they could use it. And then obviously the Chief Analyst Network are looking at how they could use it. So if you like, what we're doing as Open Innovations is taking a step back and letting the health data ecosystem have Open Data Saves Lives as an asset, but we want to help them use it in the future. And obviously, we've created an open document, which we'll share in the chat to capture some of those points. I wrote a little note, which I'll share in the chat as well. This was me describing what Open Data Saves Lives and where we've come to. So I'll share that in the chat so you can see the context of why we need to move this on into its next phase. I'm going to stop sharing and stop talking and let Mark jump in. But if anyone else has got thoughts about what we should do next or how we do it, please join in.
Yeah, I would just agree with all of that. And Sam makes an interesting point in the chat, and I think the Goldacre review about proactively. I don't think people wake up in the morning and proactively set out to share their work.
No.
So I think Sam does, but I think there's probably you wouldn't need more than a couple of hands to find people who you could say they genuinely get up and think, if I'm going to create something, it's going to be for the great. I think that's relatively rare. So what we've done over the last 3 years, I agree with you, Paul, coincided with something called the COPE notice in the NHS, which some people you would have been aware of, and that basically just made it easy to share data. So the kind of information governance restrictions were kind of loosened a bit during COVID, because you had to do something that day. You couldn't wait for a committee that only met every 2 months, because if there was some upside in examples we've done, linking data from the police to data from ED to target domestic abuse, or profiling people by name to allocate ethnicity, as we did. And we needed to do it within a week. So we profiled people's names of all of our staff and all of our patients really quickly, because on the news it said if you're black, you might be at high risk of COVID. We couldn't say, well, our ethnicity code is not very good and we'll try and improve it through next year. We did have the first names and second names of every single person who works for us and every single patient. So we profiled them, and some really interesting work came out of that. That kind of, and the reason that we're not allowed to say BAME anymore is a good thing, because it's obviously so much more subtle than that. And some work we did around name profiling in that example gave some really interesting differences between people that we as lay people here might have grouped together Eastern European names in, and we found quite different reactions from different countries to how people perceive themselves, as whether they perceive themselves as white British, for example. So some people from Eastern Europe would perceive themselves as white British, and some people absolutely wouldn't. And neither of them are right or wrong. But that type of analysis we managed to get done quite quickly. So I think, yeah, and you make an interesting point, Paul, that a kind of a few stars lined up, which meant that this would work. And people are probably retreating a little bit now. I think, going back to Sam's point about sort of proactively sharing data, I think that is the next big challenge. So a lot of the things that I get involved in are around the problems with the lack of workforce going forward. So there's an interest. So we had James Freed present here, and I'm sure he would have produced this graph, because I always nick it off him, which shows the demand for people like us going up and the likely supply of people like us is broadly flat and actually starting to go the other way. So not surprisingly, there's quite a big gap between people with strong kind of data and digital skills. I think the only way through that is if we share much more proactively and allow people to do different pieces of work for us. So in our microcosm of Kentner Medway, we want to stand up an AI function. We want to stand up data science. We want to stand up a new linked data set. There's no point everyone doing all of those things on their own. There's just not enough of us. So, and we have really good relations and wouldn't necessarily feel competitive about doing any of that. So we're happy for someone to crack on building out the warehouse while we figure out what the opportunities are around robotic process automation or reproducible analytical pipelines. We're happy to share the work out. I think in terms of where we are, and we've sort of been likened to a kind of small record label within a big record label. We're still to some extent in that sort of territory where people like us are, leading the way a little bit and think about this. But there are big workforce challenges that kind of come out of that. That's the thing for me, which we've alerted people to, but not resolved, I don't think. So
yeah, it's quite. Well, if other people can think about things that what we should do next, and maybe stick them in a doc or in the chat, that'd be fantastic. But if I share so health is one of the most active but slowest moving sectors that we work in. Really interesting is that everyone wants to talk about health data, but not much action happens. And Sam will sort of recognize this in some of the task and finish groups work. It's a nice to have. It's an add-on. Open data or open source or collaboration or doing it is seen as another task to do, rather than this is business as usual. It's just a hygiene issue. What we've seen in other sectors around transport, economics, net zero, sustainability, is that people have moved on from tell me why I should do this to we've already decided there's not enough people to do it all on our own. We need to collaborate to do this. And I think that's what's going to happen in health, is that it only goes on for so long, because if everyone's doing, if every whatever you're calling yourself, what are the units within the NHS called now? CSUs or
no, well, that's a moot point, because I think we'll end up with one CSU instead of a few competing with each other. We've got ICBs, ICPs, ICSs.
All of that. So all of that happens, and there's no way that every economic unit within the NHS should be building their own, have their own leader, or that work. We just done an inclusive growth dashboard for Leeds City Council using data from ONS and presenting it for them. That these are the 12 things that are important for Leeds City Council in terms of their economy. They're going to use this to build consistency across their approach, what their investments are, what they're doing with the central government, what they're doing locally. But we didn't just build it for Leeds, we built it for every single local authority in the country because why wouldn't you, right? It's almost exactly the same work to build the data pipelines for every single one. And Christian's on the call now who built the pipelines. But we built one UI just for Leeds. Now, it may be there are 12 different things that are interesting for Poole in Dorset than there are for Leeds City Council. There definitely will be, right? But you could very quickly build that data set. So there's a cultural change, which I think will happen very quickly. So it's like one of those things. How did you go? How did you go bankrupt? Well, slowly, then quickly. And it's the same thing with data, right? This will happen, and then very quickly we'll say, well, yeah, of course we need to do this, and that approach will smash into a lot of the structures that are set up. So having Open Data Saves Lives alongside that as a separate thing that can move, I think will be really important. And we've had examples where I'm going to mention it again, Mark. NHS Futures, an open, collaborative, closed network that doesn't let people outside the NHS in to talk about data, and then creates lots of chat rooms a la the 1990s internet, expecting people to work it. And this mad world where you expect people when they go to work to do things completely differently to what they do at home or how they would collaborate is nuts, and the fact that people aren't allowed to build their own websites to do a thing, they have to be branded and controlled and networked and locked down. That culture will change almost. You can imagine it's going to get smashed up very quickly. So I'll stop talking. But if anyone else would like to just let us know what they think, I'd like to know Sam's point of view about having Open Data Saves Lives on the side, which allows you to have different conversations than you would do more formally. What would you think we need to do next?
It's a good question. Like one of my challenges, I've been almost like there are quite a lot of communities that overlap in this sort of area. So like we have like they each have a slightly different focus. So like there's NHS Python community, NHS R community, the NHS RAP community, like Analyst X, as you've said, which is, as you said, sort of talks about using open source tools and stuff, but then it's also quite closed at the same time. Like, it even actually has sort of conflicting objectives because it's actually, financially has supporters, like in terms of, say, we're trying to use less SaaS and whatever in the business, and yet when companies like that are actively supporting Analyst X, it's sort of, or whatever, like it does mean it's a bit conflicted. So yeah, I liked being involved with you guys because you brought in some other perspectives. Because sometimes I think the health industry can be very, like, I suppose rightly into it in that we are thinking about all of our own issues and our special situation, all the rest of it. However, like having people from, potentially interacting with other, because you guys deal with not just health data, but other things, like looking at your website, net zero, all the rest of it. I think it's like a wider thing. And there are other communities that deal with this, like the government data science community is across government, and I find that really valuable because that's like ONS and like
Yeah.
and like whatever other departments that aren't health related, but they're all doing. But again, it's still all just sort of government. So you still have a sort of echo chamber, and it's sort of still a bit of groupthink, I think, about what's right and what's possible. So yeah, it was cool having you guys that are a bit more free thinking, I guess, a bit less constrained, like and hopefully we
Yeah.
can have more engagement with like the wider industry and other sort of businesses in this space. Because yeah, I guess one of the reasons to be open is not just to share data and code and stuff to help other parts of the NHS or the government. It's really to empower citizens and, just like interested parties to be able to make use of all this data for good. Like, and
Well,
again,
we
as
always talk about it lets you find friends you didn't know you have. And our superpower is usually we start on a project and we share really early that we're working on it. And somebody says, "Oh, do you know what? I've already done that already. Do you want to have a look at the code?" And then we localize it to what we're doing and improve it and give it back. But that um that that work that's done is once you share and you share you've got a problem, sharing your problems is almost as important as sharing the solution. And one of the things in health is that we notice that people now are not really keen to share early. They're not really keen to get it wrong because our world is, the quicker we get it wrong, the quicker we can get it right as well.
yeah,
That the iterative improvement is really, really important. We our flagship work at the moment is with the Youth Futures Foundation, turning all of their work around excluded young people from the employment market. I'm going to embarrass you in a minute, Taz. Taz have done a fantastic job in working on that. However, what we did was we had a map with a scale, and we got it the wrong way around, right? So darker was wrong, and but we just got it mixed up, and we didn't see it, but we shared it early, and someone said, "Are you sure that this shows that Middlesbrough has a really low um, uh, neat community?" That can't be right. And we got it wrong, right? But we were able to fix it in 15 minutes. And that ability to move at pace and deliver, and it didn't matter, right? That it just didn't matter that we got it wrong. Someone pointed it out, we fixed it. Great. I can imagine the hoo-ha or the dashboard wars that would go on if something similar had gone on with the uh, NHS website. And one of
well,
the things we forget is that the NHS COVID dashboard was amazing. It was great. It was too late. It got built really slowly, and it was too late. Um, and that institutional memory has been forgotten. And indeed, one of the people who built the NHS dashboards got in touch with them and said, "Yeah, yeah, your Youth Future ones is pretty good." Um, and the hint was that it wasn't quite as good as theirs. Um, but it looks much better now. So there was but ours was built in 3 months, not 9 months, and it's up and running, and it develops and it feeds back. And we sort of own it, but the code's all open. So if you futures want to go with someone else and build it, great, great. If someone else wants to deploy it in a different context, amazing. I think it would be great in health. We have a look at it. There's no reason why someone couldn't take what we built in the data pipelines for the Youth Futures Foundation and deliver it in a different context. If Mark builds it in Kent, it should be available for everyone. Um, how we change that, I don't know. We've got to keep working. But my prediction is it won't happen for ages, and then it'll just drop off a cliff, and it'll just be everywhere. And Mark, you're going to have all the people ready to deliver all that because that'll be the expectation. So yeah, but it's nice of you to say, Sam. It was cool having us alongside you. But we definitely have to find a way because we definitely got started. It started at the start of this year. The pushback of, well, we don't really need you. We can do it ourselves. We're building our own teams. We've done it before. And so what we need to do with Open Saves Lives is put it into the health somewhere that is health focused, so that the antibodies don't coalesce around it as much, if you like.
yeah, the strategy around this in the business is a bit confused at the moment because obviously NHS England is going through this like transformation and it's sort of sucked all the oxygen out of the room and a lot of other stuff. But yeah, I guess we'll see like when the dust settles on that in the coming months, hopefully. Because also the culture inside NHS England is a bit less open and transparent than it was in NHS Digital. I mean, and that's NHS Digital could be improved to be fair. But
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like it's sort of in some ways a bit less, even less than it was in NHS Digital. So yeah, hopefully we can change that. and then that might, because in some ways they're very up for collaborating with the groups, but they seem very focused on within the NHS community. So like, working with the regions, other trusts and stuff like that, which yeah, we'll see. Like, I think there needs to be a space for all these sort of people, and
I think one of the benefits as well of being like a small organization is we can sometimes say things that other organizations aren't allowed to. And so when we've so Stuart's been working on some constituency hex maps recently. And we think that'll be quite useful and relevant in the next couple of years. So I've just seen David Wolfson has joined as well. And so we've been having conversations about making some additions to that repository. And I think what would be interesting is mapping health inequalities data by parliamentary constituency over the next couple of years and adding it, building a repository of useful measures. Because we can do that by local authority, we can do it by ICB. And I think we're building a repository of data across all themes, and health is one of them, but we don't have a lot on there. So what would be great is, to get people involved is if you do work in health and you do work with health data frequently, and have a bit of analysis skills, then we'd welcome people to contribute to that repository and start building a database of constituency level health inequalities metrics. So that's the benefit of, as well as working in the open, is that people can fork the repo and contribute and get involved and actually build that website into something, because we're starting with transport and energy, and we work across a lot of sectors, but we're not health domain experts. So people that do work with health data would be best placed to use it and to contribute. And so what we do best is we build prototypes, we build proof of concepts, and we map things in a very we build a rough and ready prototype to show this is what's possible with the data. And then the best place for that to go is for a domain expert to then take it somewhere and build it into more of an established and detailed model. So I thought what was interesting from the last session as well was we had someone from Ignida who was working with an energy provider. So they developed an Explorer tool for identifying vulnerable customers, and that was built for a DNO. But what they did was integrated a few different health data sources, such as asthma prevalence by region, and so that's obviously interesting for a DNO, because they want to find, who's going to need support earliest, who might be on a ventilator or whatever, who are we going to need to communicate with sooner rather than later. And so that's what they were using that for. But I thought that would be a really amazing tool for identifying vulnerable customers who need to be reached by a GP service, for instance, or at a higher risk of certain illness. So it's not just about, because like you say, Sam, the NHS sort of thinks about like health, and then energy sector thinks about energy. And so the benefit of having an organization like this is that we can sort of take small parts of each one and then find what's relevant and where the shared problems are. So that's why we have those events and why we bring people together across sectors. But it's true, I think really now we're at a point where we've, ODSL for the last 3 years has been the proof of concept, it has been the prototype, and that's where we are best placed. But passing it on to someone that is a domain expert to build it into more of an established product is what we're doing now. So it's just finding the right home for it. But if you are interested in developing that repository,
I'm gonna pick on Alex. You talked to us a lot at the start, and you've been alongside of what we've done. So you're one of those nasty private sector health data people, aren't you?
I am, yeah.
What do you think we should do next? Obviously, you're not nasty, but yeah.
No, I am nasty. Well, I mean, for me, I think this has been a really good. I mean, as you talked about, Paul, a lot of the forums are closed, or a lot of the forums are NHS only, and you've got some, pretty formal forums like Tech UK, which obviously there's a fairly high fee to buy your way
Yeah.
into that. So for me, what has been valuable is bringing together, as you said, predominantly an NHS audience, but also people that work with the NHS to just hear different perspectives. I did think that Med Confidential session was one of the best ones I went to. I didn't make the Goldacre one, I'm afraid, but also some of the other really practical ones where people were showing some of the dashboards and the data and that they've done was also particularly useful. So for me, in terms of what you can do next, it's capturing that different sectors coming together and to be able to exchange ideas, because we're exchanging people all the time. You know, analysts leave the NHS and go into the private sector and vice versa, and there's different attractions. So I think that the salary divide is getting worse at the moment, and then I think James Freed talks about that and talked about that at his session, I think. So that's one thing that we need to manage. But I think something Mark's really good at is, how do you think about people doing, you know, can you do placements? Can you do knowledge transfers? Can you just formalize that? Because we haven't got all the answers, and the NHS hasn't got all the answers. And some of those conversations in the chat around getting access to data, we're struggling. So I've got some data at the moment, all signed off by the lawyers, I should say, which is coming out of a hospital in the Midlands, going to America to be decrypted, and then coming back to us to be analysed once we decrypt it. You know, that's definitely not the best solution. And actually, the customers said they don't want that to happen going forward, because they've taken a dislike to the American third party. So, you know, that's something practical that other people might be able to solve. And we just want the quickest way to get unencrypted data. It doesn't matter to us if there's a third party decrypting that. But actually, one of the merits, and this would be a good case study, although we haven't got the project outcomes yet, is now people in the NHS hospital are playing around to see if they can run the extraction and run the decryption, because obviously the best thing is that they would do it themselves. This time last year it was not possible, haven't got the time, haven't got the people. This is your problem. Now we're kind of trying to solve that. So it's just those little case studies like that I think.
Yeah. And there's no reason that process, the process could be open, but the actuality, you know, the real data isn't. You know, there's a bunch of code that we've used and deployed, and it worked.
Well, I mean, it's from a big American vendor, and the cynic in me thinks they encrypt the data because there is now a whole market of startups that can decrypt that data. I don't think we've picked the right one, if I'm being frank. And my hunch is that big American vendor, who you can all guess what it was, will buy the best startup and then sell that decryption services back anywhere, you know, anywhere in the world.
I tell you.
That's my cynical idea.
Yeah. But actually, that cynicism, being open, I think that, you know, you're amongst friends, Alex.
Exactly.
I think on the call, I can spot many cynics in the.
But yeah, I think going forward, it's that cross sector. That's what I've appreciated.
Sorry, I've just joined and I missed the first half of this, so I apologise if some of this repeats. We had some great conversations a little while ago and started to pick up on using some of your open tools to get some insights. My blocker on that has been a little bit of my own knowledge and skill sets, and I'm sat in North Coders doing a software development bootcamp, so hoping to come back to some of those things when I'm actually able to do a bit more of the work. But the little group of people I've been talking with about this is that we really want to use those tools to understand the unmet needs. It's a little group of people who are fairly entrepreneurial, but really getting started and interested in the digital health kind of ecosystem that's in Leeds, and that's really exciting. But one of the things that regularly comes up in those Leeds digital health sessions is that Leeds particularly has got some significant health inequalities, and can't the ecosystem around there be addressing those? But what we've not yet found in a space that we can access is some descriptions of what those are, and really some dashboards around what those health inequalities mean in this region, so that we can look to start doing some work in that space. And I think we've talked about the constituency maps. For me, one of the things that we could be doing is using those type of tools to help different communities in different areas understand what their needs are, so that either the communities can look to address that, or the kind of the healthcare providers and the NHS, or actually innovative startups, new businesses, to say there is a need here, we're going to try and address that. So for me, there's some opportunity if we can use these tools and access the data in this health space, to start to put that information into the open so that people can respond and take action based on it. I think
health inequalities dashboard.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I think there's that moment during COVID when Boris was presenting a load of graphs on Saturday night, which was quite surreal, but also quite positive in the sense that people are starting to get used to data for themselves. And we found ourselves going around with this weird information governance loop where we didn't think we could do anything, and then we went, hang on a minute, unless the data is identifiable, if it's aggregated at some sort of level, constituency or GP or provider or maybe middle super up area, you can actually publish a whole load of stuff. And I think it would be really interesting if we empowered, is that sort of creepy word, people to just have a load of data. If I give you an example at the moment, diabetes, there's 9 diabetes checks that a GP should do on a patient regularly. And you won't be surprised to learn that some GPs do them all the time and some don't do them very often. It'd be really, really interesting if local people, and that sounds patronising, I don't mean it to, but could easily access data about themselves, about their healthcare, and then challenge a GP or an MP or a provider. I think the one thing I found from the relationship with NHS Digital in the beginning, Paul, was when Alistair sort of presented, we've got all this data, there wasn't much of it at all. It was pretty anodyne, and it wasn't really presented in a particularly interesting. It definitely wasn't there for the man in the street. You really needed to know what SUS stood for and how to handle outpatient data, and it was in a spreadsheet if you knew where to get it. It was a bit disappointing, and I think where Open Innovations and ODSL to some extent within that broke through a little bit was, here's a hex map that suddenly everyone's hammering and they've broken your server. That I think is still the big opportunity, that you could have a region where people were engaging in their own data, because it's been presented in such a simple way, because people do that all the time. People use all sorts of apps which got data on, and there's loads of graphics on the FT or the BBC website, and people are perfectly comfortable with that. And you could put a load more data out there, but also put it out in a much more visually interesting way, I think. And I think we gave glimpses of that.
Yeah, and someone got in touch with us earlier in the year as well from Scotland, from the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership up there, saying that they'd used one of our hex maps. And they'd used it during a hack event up there to model the gender difference in their service use across Scotland. So they sent us that through and said, we've used this, and just because they needed a hex map builder that they could rustle up very quickly, and so they were keen to get involved in that way. So just the fact that it's online, the fact that it's easy to use and well documented, means that someone in Scotland can just go and pick it up. But I do like what you're saying, David, about a regional health inequalities dashboard with a few key metrics, but also, like you say, Mark, it's like without the you need some level of domain knowledge to understand the data, and to sort of, it is quite an insight. It is quite the NHS has its own language, and every domain does, but the NHS is especially that way because it's so service driven, and a lot of it is down to the sort of in-depth understanding of how the services are delivered and the different pathways and the different how outcomes are measured and that kind of thing. But with a bit of that knowledge, and I think
you're being polite there.
Do you think so? Do you think? That's my diplomatic version.
I think there's a big gap. So if a load of people from public health were on here, they would say, we've already done all this. It's called fingertips.
Yeah.
And we would all say, no one ever looks at it.
And it's hard to use.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah, it's quite hard to
Difficult,
use.
yeah.
It's at a layer of abstraction which makes it less interesting. I think when you could actually have data, at low enough level to be interesting. I think in a way that people look at data about schools and
Yeah.
GPs and all sorts of things when they move house. It's all there.
Zoopla.
Yeah.
We could do a Zoopla for health, couldn't we?
Yeah.
We've been doing a
David,
lot.
I'm just going to introduce you to Stephen Blackburn, who's on the call from Leeds City Council. Do you know Steve?
Steve and I have met at exactly some of these events in the past, met through here and met through some of the Leeds Digital Health as well. So
Imagine, Stephen, I think you're picking up a task here of
Am I?
there might be an action
Quick
coming.
dial off.
Another one.
The Leeds, well, obviously we're building the inclusive growth dashboard, but the inequalities or health inequalities dashboard would be, I think, be great because you can reduce health inequalities by making us all really ill. That's great, and then you can reduce economic inequality by making us all much poorer. However, what you need, how do you reduce inequalities? By improving everyone's health or economy, and those two are linked, right? Poor people have worse health outcomes, and making people healthier. Probably the first thing you do is give them a better job or more money. Is the usual thing. So there's conversations there, but I don't think there'd be any. I think you could quite quickly build a Leeds health inequalities or a Kent health inequalities or build the first version. And one of the tests I would give Open Data Saves Lives 2.0 would be, here we go. There's got a Power BI one, but then put that on the web. Basically here's a prototype, and then let's build a website that that means something to more normal people. I don't know what a PCN is or local. Yeah. And then test it, put it live, and get some feedback. And Graham, I think it'll be incumbent on us as how could we put what you've done there on the web or on an app or make it useful and use it in different contexts. Yeah.
Yeah, and we were having a conversation yesterday about the use of technology-enabled care solutions primarily in adult social care, but it cuts across really. And we're having initial discussions about putting a partnership together. And they're doing something similar in Sheffield, and that partnership they've got in Sheffield includes people from housing. But ultimately they're talking about health. But it's, as you've just said, Paul, if you live in a good quality house, your health and well-being is likely to improve. If you've got a good job, then your health is likely to be improved. It's all that sort of interconnectivity really across the piece. And that's really what our, I guess, inclusive growth strategy is all about, really, that everybody benefits from the city's prosperity and that we all have better quality health and all the rest of it. And in fact, last week as well, there was a launch of the refreshed health and well-being and Leeds Healthy plan. They were relaunched last week as well for the next sort of 5 years or so. But they go beyond just people being well and patching people up in hospital and sending them home. It's everything else that's wrapped around it that improves your overall health and well-being, and we need to consider all of that as well, not just speak to people that work in the health and care system.
So Graham highlight you. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could combine those two things you put there, and we could then work with you to build something like we built for the Youth Futures Foundation, which is a beautiful website that shows the data in really easy to consume ways. But every single PCN ICB shouldn't be doing it themselves. There should be a few things that get built, and we then maintain them and update them as they go. But I haven't seen yet that proper open source community develop around health data. So So I'll be giving that that's the other job for Open Data Saves Lives, is to, be amazing if something that was built in Cornwall was delivered in Carlisle and the people doing it never spoke to each other. That would be the dream, wouldn't it?
Well, I'll be flippant. It'd be the dream if the NHS would be happy to share data between themselves, let alone between other organisations. I've had a call this morning, and if I had hair, I'd be pulling it out, But it's just crazy, really. Some of the barrier, the IG barriers that we face when we all want to achieve the same thing, but you come across these hurdles that fair enough. I'm not opposed to checks and balances, but by God, we make it difficult for ourselves.
Okay, Mark, do you want to close out? Or Graham, did you want to jump in before we? You shared some stuff in the chat there.
No, I don't think I've really got much else to add. I definitely echo the exact point that Stephen just made just then. It's unbelievably hard to share data, and I get the point about IG and personal information, but there's now real variation in information governance across England, where some ICBs have got patient identifiable stuff sorted for direct care purposes, and for some reason Leeds hasn't. And I think a lot of that is to do with the actual IG professionals in places all having different risk appetites. It's just hard, but it shouldn't be.
Was it IG Theatre?
Oh, I'm not going to swear.
Yeah, I mean, this is like an AA group for Graham, Stephen, and I. It's a daily battle. I put a comment right at the beginning at the top of this. There's something that we talked about when we had one of our in-person events in Leeds, was reproducible IG.
Yes.
And someone's just messaged me about that this morning, actually. Could we do that regionally? For God, why would we start from scratch for every DPIA and every bit of government, every decision why would we not actively share that in the same way that through GitHub we're sharing all of our data and code? And I can't see why we wouldn't do that. So I think that's something that we should pick up after this. And I think, like you, Paul, we just, it's worked really, really well. And it's really good news that it's probably going to have a home and live somewhere. We should probably just keep this network going. That's relatively straightforward to do.
Well, everyone's signed up now, so you don't get away. So you're on the mailing list, and that's your first rule of Open Data Saves Lives is you have to talk about it, and you never get away from it. So the network will continue, and we just got to make sure that we, like anything, a business, an organization, it has to grow. Right? You have to have growth and development, and that's part of what we're doing now, is taking a chance to take a breather, looking at what our priorities are, and sounds to me like that question that right at the start was reproducible IG. Be massively valuable. Imagine the productivity boost that the NHS would get from having that, and having model DPIAs, model worked examples. And it's fascinating why that doesn't exist, right?
I know.
The incentives to maintain more must be higher than the incentives to reduce it. But we're not going to fix it right now, but it might be a challenge that we could do.
Yeah, I mean, I think if a last point would be that stuff is potentially easy to fix if you've got a louder voice from coming together, which is what this group has done. So the centre should make the IG easier for everyone else. That must be the only point of the centre. So we'll do a collective Section 251 approval for every ICB, for every secure data environment. Don't worry about doing it. But instead, you've got us all individually writing in, asking for slightly different things, and an industry of people at the beginning saying, we like this one, we don't like that one. I mean, it's bonkers. So there's something about coming together makes things easier, which is again why we've done this CIO network. As Paul said, we'll all keep in touch anyway. I would just end by just thanking everyone for making the time to get involved. It's it's a really good group.
And it's not over, right? This is definitely it's not over. It's just going to be 2.0 from 2024.
there's some promising discussion there as well about, having a dashboard and presenting that data in a more digestible way.
Yes.
And yeah, so we'll see. Follow up with some of you about that.
Mark, I think it's up to you to wish everyone Merry Christmas.
I haven't got it on because it was on Teams and not on Zoom, but I've got an NHS Kenner Medway Christmas tree thing, which I've been turning on and off depending on the audience of people. So I had to turn it off for quite a difficult conversation earlier, but I turned it back on for the meeting afterwards. So imagine there's a background a bit like Stephen's with a Christmas tree.
I think Stephen
so,
wins the Christmas.
yeah, so Merry Christmas, all of you.
Somebody asked me yesterday, is that a big Christmas tree that's very far away or quite a small tree?
That's on your shoulder.
So it's quite a small tree. The baubles are nearly bigger than the tree, actually.
Okay, have an amazing Christmas and we'll be in touch in the new year.
Yeah, thanks.